I never imagined the love of my life would betray me so completely. The night I came home early, the scene I stumbled upon shattered my world. There she was, in the arms of another man, her lover. The pain was unbearable, but the rage, oh, the rage, was something else, entirely. My heart pounded with a fury I'd never known. This was just the beginning of a dark, twisted journey of betrayal and revenge. The dark clouds filled the sky to the west as the yellow school bus drove down a winding hill toward the crossroads of Texas 29 and US 281. This place marked the halfway point of their trip. On the bus were 36 basketball players, 3 coaches, and 3 student helpers. They were traveling northwest on a 3-hour journey through the hills to play their last district game. Winning this game could give them a chance at the district championship. The Mustangs were at the top of the leaderboard in a tough district with only 1 loss. Coach Tim Kelly's Cougars and the Bulldogs were tied for second place, each with 2 losses. If the Mustangs won tonight, the outcome of the Cougars game wouldn't matter for the playoffs. But if the Mustangs lost and the Cougars won, they would have to play again to decide the district winner. If the Yellow Jackets won while the Mustangs lost, there would be a 3-way tie, and they'd have to flip a coin to see who would represent the district. Both teams knew it was unlikely for the Mustangs to lose to the team in last place, but they were eager to play. The weather forecast was a worry, though. The weatherman had been talking all week about a rare chance of ice and snow in central Texas. They even mentioned that blizzard-like conditions could happen, but most people just laughed it off. It was said the cold weather wouldn't start until after midnight in the western hill country, where they were headed. This meant they needed to hurry to finish the game before anything bad happened. If the storm arrived as expected, it would follow them home and not cause any trouble for the bus. But the weather news was tricky, especially with cold air meeting warm air, and Coach Kelly hadn't heard a forecast since noon. The Bulldogs coach told him there was still no change, so the games were on. So they drove toward a winter storm in an old school bus that didn't have a great heater and hoped the weather would stay clear until after the games were done, and they were back home, likely well after midnight. Coach Kelly parked the bus beside a big convenience store and stood up to talk to the kids. He reminded them to behave well and represent their school and families when they were indoors. He also told them that because of the bad weather, they wouldn't have time to eat after the game, so they should grab snacks now and have something more filling at the concession stand later. After they finished eating, the 2 assistant coaches went into the store with the players to keep an eye on things, making sure the store staff didn't feel nervous about their actions. They knew their kids wouldn't cause any trouble, but it was good to keep the store staff happy. The coaches stood by the doors until all the kids were back on the bus. Coach Kelly took a moment to stretch and walked around the bus to help his blood flow before driving the last 90 minutes to their game. He checked the tires and looked for any leaks. A flat tire or a problem with the bus would be a disaster on this journey, with narrow roads and steep hills where he couldn't pull over. He looked toward their destination, feeling more worried about the weather. The clouds seemed darker and closer than before. He really questioned if the storm would come as the forecast said. He wished he had one of those new mobile phones to check the weather, but no big companies were ready to set up the networks for them yet. Tim knew he would invest in the first company that took that risk. Maybe he should invite those bigwigs to join him on trips like this to see why it was needed. Meanwhile, the players, trainers, and coaches were coming back from the store, so he rushed inside to use the restroom. On his way out, he thanked the cashiers for their kindness and was warmly praised for how well-behaved the kids were. The store manager eagerly said, "We love when your bus stops here. You can tell the kids have been raised well, and you coaches make sure they represent your school nicely." Tim promised they would stop at the store again on the way back after the game and would share the compliments with the players and their parents. Feeling good, Coach Kelly stepped outside, but he was met by 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies. Knowing that 39 kids and 2 coaches were watching him from the bus, he greeted them with a friendly smile. The larger deputy spoke. "Coach, we just got a call from your transportation director. The cold front is coming in faster and stronger than we thought, so the games have been postponed. You need to head back right away and make sure every kid gets home safely." He added, It's going to be a bad storm, and it'll hit around 10 to 11 p.m. instead of 3 or 4 a.m. You should get moving. Can we go with you to the sheriff's office and use the phone to make some calls? We don't want to be outside in the cold waiting for our parents, he asked. We have a phone tree, so only one player from each team, freshman, JV, and varsity, needs to make a call. It would really help us, the deputy said. That sounds good. It doesn't matter how many calls we need to make. We just want to get everyone home before the bad weather hits with strong winds, freezing rain, sleet, and snow in a few hours. After making the calls to the parents, Tim contacted the bus barn to let them know they were heading back. He also thanked the deputies again. On the way back, the teens chatted nervously but excitedly. They were getting over their disappointment about not playing. They started dreaming about what they could do if it snowed and planned their Friday night activities without school obligations. Although the phone tree worked, there were still 2 girls and a boy who needed rides to a new neighborhood by Lake Travis because their parents were in Austin and wouldn't be home for a while. Since no one else was going that way, Tim offered them a ride in his truck and made the 40-mile round trip. As he drove, he thought about how the winter storm could affect things, like power outages. In his part of the county, homes relied on electric heating since there were no natural gas supplies. He wanted to make sure he had plenty of firewood stored on the covered patio and stacked some near the fireplace just in case. Before dropping off the kids, he reminded them to do the same. It was almost 8 p.m. when he arrived home, and the only light on was in the living room. That meant his 2 young sons had already gone to bed, and he and his lovely wife, Karen, would finally have some time to relax together by the fireplace. They usually did this on Saturdays to unwind after a busy week as teachers, but this early opportunity felt like a gift. After 3.5 months of football practice and basketball games every Friday since football ended, a full weekend together was wonderful, even if a blizzard was on the way. They deserved this time together. Karen was a talented kindergarten teacher, and Tim was a dedicated science teacher and a coach for both football and basketball. They were well respected because they cared about their students. However, their hard work sometimes took away time and energy they could have used to keep their marriage strong during the week. Saturday and Sunday were for family during the day, and at night they had time for just the 2 of them. Sometimes this included date nights, but usually they just enjoyed each other's company at home. After getting home, Tim filled a wheelbarrow with wood from the woodpile, added some oak logs to the stack under the covered patio, and made sure it was 6 feet high and 8 feet long. Just to be safe, he brought in one last load of wood and parked the wheelbarrow under the patio near the sliding glass doors. Quietly, Tim entered the house through the laundry room, hung up his coat, and tiptoed through the kitchen to the living room, hoping to surprise Karen. He thought she would be curled up on the couch with her eyes closed, dozing off. He hoped she was wearing her soft satin sleepwear instead of her flannel pajamas, which meant she was too tired for a surprise. But when he peeked in, he saw their favorite babysitter, Sharon, sitting on the couch. She nearly jumped when she saw him. "Coach, what are you doing here? Don't you have a game far away?" Tim was surprised. Sharon had graduated early to go to college, so he thought she was away at school. "Hi, Sharon. The game was postponed because of the winter storm. We're supposed to play on Tuesday if we need to catch up. If not, our season is done. What about you? Why aren't you in college?" Sharon looked a bit confused. "I'm living at home and going to community college this semester to earn more credits before I start at UT. It's cheaper to take the basic courses here. Mrs. Kelly went to your game tonight like she always does. I guess you didn't see her on the road. I hope they're okay. I don't think they knew about the bad weather." Tim's face showed his worry. "Sharon, just to be clear, Karen and some others went to our game tonight. She has been going to all our away games, and you've been babysitting for her." Sharon's face changed when she realized, "Oh no, they haven't been going to your games? Oh no. Coach, you have to believe me. I didn't think about it. I'm so sorry. I should have known better." "You're not stupid," Tim replied. "Let's just take a breath and not jump to any conclusions. Who is the woman she's been going to the away games with?" With her eyes downcast, she mumbled, "Coach Rogers asked me to babysit. I don't know who asked the other girls. He told me it was easier for him to ask since your wife is at the elementary school. The first time I babysat, it was just him and her going out. Given what people say about him, I should have been worried and told you. But you both seemed so happy that I didn't think anything was wrong. I'm sorry. I should have listened to you when you mentioned it the first time. Sharon, who else has been involved? I've only watched the kids 3 times. 2 days after Christmas, when your team was playing in the holiday tournament. And tonight, the first time she left with Coach Rogers. The next time they said they were going with Coach Slaughter and his wife. I only saw Coach Rogers tonight. But Mrs. Kelly mentioned they were picking up Coach Slaughter and his wife. Coach Slaughter even talked to me at Dairy Queen today. He said that as the athletic director, he needed to be there. And his wife thought it would be nice for Mrs. Kelly to ride along, so I didn't think much of it. She paused, looking thoughtful, then went on. There were other babysitters for the other games, but Coach Rogers asked us not to talk about it. He said your wife didn't want anyone to feel bad because they hadn't been called. Looking back, we should have been suspicious about that. But you talked among yourselves, Tim asked. Yes. Since I graduated in December, I don't see my friends as much, but we still chat every week or two when we do. We can't help but talk about your little boys. They are so cute, we always share stories about them, Sharon replied. From those chats, you learned that my wife was going to every out-of-town game with Rogers and the Slaughters, Tim clarified. Yes, Sharon said. Tim looked closely at Sharon, who seemed more embarrassed by the chat, and asked, when did he pick her up? Tonight. He dropped me off at 4 o'clock and they left soon after, Sharon explained. Mrs. Kelly had a casserole ready to go in the oven and asked me to feed the kids at 6. She said she wouldn't be back until around midnight since the game is so far away. Tim sighed. Sharon, can you stay here until one of us returns? It's possible they didn't know about the game being canceled and went anyway, or maybe they found out before they left and stopped at Coach Slaughter's house for a drink. Or maybe they stopped to eat somewhere. There are too many possibilities. I'm going to look around for them before the bad weather hits. If she calls, please don't mention the game being canceled or that you saw me, okay? Oh, and what car was Coach Rogers driving? She replied that she was booked until midnight, so she was planning on staying and told him they left with Coach. Where are you going to look? There are a lot of options. I don't know where they might be, so I'm going to drive back to the high school and see if Coach Slaughter's car is there. That way, I'll know what car to look for, and then I'll ride around to see if I can spot it. I'll also check with the transport director to see if they were told about the game being canceled. If they did, I won't worry about them getting stuck on the road. I'll check homes, bars, and restaurants. Whether or not I find them, Sharon, I promise I'll come back and take care of you and the boys. I won't leave you to face the storm alone. She smiled at his promise, but then frowned. What are you going to do if you find them, Coach? Please don't lose your temper and get into trouble. You're my favorite person, and I don't want you to get hurt over something I helped cause, Tim assured her. Sharon, you didn't help cause this, and don't worry. I just want to make sure they are safe. There may be a good reason for all this, and I'll want to give her a chance to explain. But I don't intend to harm anyone. Just talk. She nodded. He asked her to check on the boys and get the flashlights and lanterns from the guest room, just in case the bad weather causes a power outage. When she went down the hall, he opened the coat closet by the door, took out a special pistol, a shotgun, and a rifle. He brought the guns to the truck, grabbed his ammo bag, and put on a heavy coat he had bought for a trip to the mountains in Colorado. He built a nice fire in the fireplace, lit the wood, and closed the screen. He turned back to see Sharon standing behind him with a flashlight. He told her, "Maybe you should get into our bed, cover up and rest just in case we are up late tonight. That way you will be near the boys' room in case they wake up and need something. Keep the phone close, keep the fire going, and if anyone calls, act like nothing is wrong. I'll be back soon." She put her hand on his arm, looked into his eyes, and told him again to be careful. She then went down the hall to the bedrooms. He picked up his camera and a couple of rolls of film and hurried to the truck. Even with the carport blocking the wind, it was very cold. Using the dim light from the kitchen window, he put on the pistol, unloaded the shotgun, and loaded it with 7 shells. After making sure the gun was ready, he climbed into the pickup. As he glanced back at the house, he saw Sharon standing in the doorway. The cold wind swirled around her, moving her soft blonde hair. She looked anxious, and the shorts and light hooded sweatshirt she wore were not right for the bad weather coming. He promised himself he had to get her home as soon as he finished his work. The road to the lakeside ranch owned by his grandmother, John William J. W. Rogers, was rough, narrow, and bumpy. So even though he felt angry and worried, Tim had to drive carefully. The radio from Austin was talking a lot about the winter storm that had already brought a lot of ice, sleet, and snow to the Concho Valley in the western hill country. The announcer strongly warned that the storm was getting worse, dropping more ice as the cold air met the warm, wet air. He repeated a message from Austin Electric and PC, telling people to get ready in case they lost power during the storm. But fully staffed teams would work through the night to get the power back on quickly when there was an outage. The warnings made Tim more determined to get back to Sharon and his sons quickly. He thought carefully about his plan. He couldn't leave them alone all night without light or heat. He had to get this right. He had 4 questions to figure out. Who was she with? What were they doing? How long had this been going on and why? Even if he had to use force or threaten them, he would find out the answers. The truck was warm, but he felt a knot of fear in his stomach as he neared the last house before the Rogers ranch. Tim slowed down and turned off his headlights. He didn't want anyone to see his truck. Another car was at the Rogers ranch house. Though it was out of sight, the lights were on. He could see the TV in the living room and the heads of an old couple sitting on the couch, facing away from him. A quarter-mile later, he turned his headlights back on and thanked nature for the little bit of light left before the storm arrived. He used that light to stay on the narrow road, turning his headlights off again before he went over the last hill. He got within a quarter-mile of the bright house, then backed in and parked on a road surrounded by bushes. The road went beside a small stream that crossed the county road. He couldn't see the house from over the hill, and no one there could see him. The sky to the northwest was dark now, with only occasional flashes of lightning, showing the storm was getting closer. Above him, the sky was only slightly cloudy, and he had enough moonlight to see the path he would walk on. He guessed he had about 40 to 45 minutes, maybe even less, before the winter storm hit and made it hard to escape. He pulled out his knife belt from the console, securing it across his shoulder where it could be reached easily. He threw the rifle over the other shoulder and hung the camera around his neck. He took the cassette recorder he used for lessons and put it in an inner pocket of his hunting jacket, along with a flashlight. He chuckled to himself about how he often wore this gear while dragging a deer out of the brush in the dark, reminding himself to hold his shotgun in his right hand. He jogged across the culvert and up the hill to the ranch house. There was one light on by the electric pole, and 3 trucks and a car were parked in the dark near the corner of the house. Tim checked the house and, seeing no one, crept through the dark toward the lighted windows at the front, staying clear of the light shining from inside. He peeked into the living room. Coach Rogers, Coach Slaughter, and Mary Benton, a school board member, were there, laughing and chatting with no clothes on. Tim took out his recorder, found a window in the old ranch house that he knew was always a little open, and placed the recorder on the ledge. The laughter quieted down, and Benton said, "Wow, she's a real catch. Thanks for inviting me again." Slaughter replied, "She really is. Thanks to JW and me, we're having the best party in the state." Benton asked, "How did you guys get her interested?" Slaughter replied, "It all started at coaching school last summer in Dallas. She wore those short dresses, making us notice her. Then we saw her sunbathing in a bikini. I told him we had to get to know her. I made sure her husband Tim and the new coaches had to go to the All-Star game that night, which ruined any plans they had. She was really mad when he called, saying she was all dressed up, waiting for him in the bar. She wore a satin jumpsuit that left little to the imagination, cut low in front and back, clearly showing her thong. She approached me right away, but I explained that someone had to take the new coaches to the game and told her that her husband needed to focus more on football if he wanted to keep his job. So I picked him. I bought her 2 drinks and asked the bartender to make them strong. Then I got her to sit in a booth in a quieter room where the jukebox was playing music. Everyone else was in the main bar enjoying free snacks, so we were alone. I asked her to dance with me a couple of times and kept giving her strong drinks while I tried to charm her. The bartender took a $20 bill to keep the room private, and I started talking to her. But suddenly, she pulled away and told me she was sorry but couldn't continue. She quickly left for her room. After that, she tried to avoid me, but she later came up with a new plan for when basketball season started. "JW, why don't you take over?" I asked, and we began. Most women say I have a way with words. Maybe that's true, but some think I'm just talking nonsense, Vincent replied. I kept chatting with her during the early basketball games, stopping by her room after school just to talk, and then I called her in the evenings. At first, it was all innocent, but I slowly started to give her compliments and pointed out how her husband was often away, leaving her to care for their boys, clean the house, and work full-time. You know, just the usual flirty talk. By early December, we were sharing intimate conversations over the phone. It started small, like me asking what she was wearing and telling her she looked great in the dress from school. I would say, "Your voice is nice," and "You have lovely legs." During a basketball tournament from the 27th to the 30th, I turned up the flirty talk while her husband was out. On the 27th, I showed up at her house with a babysitter and coaxed her into going out for drinks with me. When she got in the truck, I gave her a strong drink and took her to a different place. She was hesitant, but I reminded her that people at other bars might know us, and we didn't want to start any rumors. Once we arrived, I made her another strong drink. I told her how nice she looked in her sweater dress and boots, and when I handed her the third drink, I sat close to her on the couch. I asked for a kiss. The first time, she didn't resist. The second kiss, she kissed me back. That was when things changed for us. After it ended, she told me to take her home and got dressed quickly. I complied, but she didn't answer my calls the next day. I knew the team had their last game that night, so I brought the babysitter over again and told her to get ready because I was taking her and some parents to the game in Taylor. She seemed worried at first, but brightened up when I mentioned the parents. When she returned, she wore her favorite blue dress and white boots. But when I drove toward my place instead of Taylor, she got upset. I handed her a large drink and let her vent. Then, I told her I had recorded our time together and we could have fun again tonight, or I would send the video to her husband. She cried when I said that, but I reminded her how much she enjoyed our last time together and hinted that I had a late Christmas gift for her. She drank her drink quickly, stopped crying, and berated me for a while. Even with the cursing, I pulled her close and kissed her deeply. She responded, and I began to undress her right there by the couch. I think Coach would agree with me. She looked amazing in her white boots, white lace panties, and matching bra. She looked a lot better than just amazing. J.W. Slaughter chimed in when I returned from the kitchen, having been watching. She was already with him. I eventually joined them, and we took turns with her. Afterward, she insisted on going home, but we promised her we would be better next time. She said there wouldn't be a next time, but JW insisted we would pick her up 30 minutes after the bus left for the tournament the next day and to skip wearing underwear. She said no, but when we showed up with a different babysitter at 3:30, she wore that little blue and white striped mini dress with no panties or bra. JW drove, and I enjoyed the ride to the ranch. JW added that she took her dress off not long after we left her house and was naked on the way to the outskirts of town. We got a few honks, but she didn't care. She was having too much fun. Steve didn't last long that day. That was when we got Frank Hughes, her principal, involved. She walked into the living room completely naked. She not only captivated us, but also told us later that she had a wild time with her husband when he came home. She was quite the catch. I was grateful she was ours. Frank stepped into the living room while we shared these stories and joined the conversation. I had big plans for that woman. I had already told her to wear shorter dresses for work and to stay late at least twice a week for meetings with her principal and his friends. "Tell me this. What happens when her husband finds out?" Benton asked. "Hopefully he will let her go," Steve replied. "We could really use a woman like her full time." JW spoke up. "We're trying hard to keep that from happening. My brother coaches nearby, and I've heard that her husband can be both a good friend and a bad enemy. There are whispers that he has a dark side, but that didn't worry Benton. If he gets tough, I'll make sure he regrets it. Karen will get the house and whatever little money he has, and he won't end up well if he fights back. I'll make sure some friends of mine will take care of him. He might even drag his sons into trouble with him, if that's what it takes to have Karen all to myself. You have to remember, she doesn't just hang out with guys like us. Imagine how much power she has over on Congress Avenue in Austin." JW placed a hand on his arm and said, We'll depend on you if he's foolish enough to cause trouble. But if he never finds out, it won't matter. Sooner or later, we'll convince her to leave him and we'll set her up in a nice place. We can make fun videos and she can entertain us and our business friends, as you call them." They laughed, slapped each other on the back, and went to grab another drink from the kitchen. Tim tried to calm the anger bubbling inside him as he leaned against the building, focusing on his plan. The wind picked up, and a light rain began to fall as he took out his recorder and quietly moved around the side of the house to the bedroom where Frank had left. The curtains were open, and neither window was completely shut in the old house. He could clearly see and hear what was happening inside, even though he already knew what he'd find. Seeing it still shocked him. How could this woman, who had been a loving wife and mother for 5 years, be involved in something so different? His stomach twisted. He pushed down his anger, ready to use it to get what he needed to do finished, and started taking pictures. The heavyset school superintendent and the school board VP, John Allen, were standing near the bed where his wife was with an unknown younger man. Allen was filming everything with a camera when the young man finished and got off the bed. Tim recognized Larry Barnes, the husband of Jeannie, a nice fellow teacher and friend. Barnes got off the bed, turned to Joe Warden, who was next for Karen, and said loudly, "Isn't it great that her husband can't please her? So she comes to us. I don't mind at all. My wife always says what a great guy he is, but I know she went to him after I had to talk to her last time. I thought they were having an affair, but I guess I shouldn't worry about that now. He can't even meet his wife's needs." Karen stopped Warden from getting closer, placing her foot on his chest. Then she sweetly said, "Come here, Larry, you big guy. I want you again right now." Larry looked at her with a smirk, but just laughed. "You've worn me out, woman. After you're done with these two, maybe I'll be ready for more." With a hint of malice, Karen replied, "So, you big guy, if we were married, you wouldn't be able to make me happy, right? You're my fifth of the night and you didn't meet my needs. I've been with you until you couldn't take any more, just like the first 4, and I'll do the same with the next 2. Then I'll just start again, if any of you can keep up. So, Larry, you big guy in your dreams, let me give you something to think about while you recover. You're not even half as big as Tim. You lasted about 1/10 of the time he does. And if I offered Tim more, he'd come over and really take care of me after 5 minutes. And remember, if you ever talk down to Tim again, I'll make sure you regret it." With tears in her eyes but strength in her voice, she said firmly, "It's not Tim's fault he married me, but I'll tell you, he satisfies me way better than any of you can. Larry called her a bad name." She answered, "Exactly." And he left the room, losing his usual bravado. With the mood broken, Karen got off the bed, went into the restroom, and then into the living room. Tim moved back to the window just in time to hear Karen firmly say, "I'm done. You need to take me home now, J.W." Her announcement surprised her partners and Steve J.W. Frank, and Benton took turns trying to convince her to stay. They promised to get rid of Larry if that's what she wanted and said they would take care of her for the rest of the night. If she'd just stay a little longer. J.W. wrapped his arm around her. "We promise to send you home satisfied, not angry. Have a drink with us. Relax for a bit, then we can decide what happens next. There's no hurry. You know we all care for you and we'll take good care of you. Besides, if we get this scene done tonight, we can take a break for a while before we finish up. Larry, you need to apologize to Karen for your rude comments. Then grab your clothes and head home. We don't want your wife to worry about you, do we?" Tim was on his last 10 shots of film, and with everyone in the living room trying to change Karen's mind, he made a quick decision to sneak into the bedroom and grab the tapes from the cameras they were using to record everything. Once inside the bedroom, he took the tape from the camera on the tripod at the foot of the bed and put in a blank tape from a stack on a chair. He did the same with the camera left on the bed. As he turned to leave, he noticed more tapes on the shelf by the door. Tim grabbed a stained pillow, took off the pillowcase, and stuffed the pillow under the bed. He quickly looked through the more than 20 videotapes, grabbed all the ones with KK on the label, and added one called Party Highlights. Then he just took more videos and stuffed them into his pillowcase until it was full. He tied the top with some cloth so he could carry it and slipped back out the door into the cold wind. The freezing rain hit him hard, and he realized he was running out of time. He started to jog back to his truck, holding a shotgun in one hand, the .30 rifle slung over his shoulder, and the pillowcase in the other hand. When he passed Larry's BMW, anger bubbled up inside him. That guy who seemed to get away with everything made him furious. He pulled out his big knife, stabbed 2 of the tires, and muttered, "Take that, you arrogant jerk." He figured it would be a challenge to change 2 tires in a snowstorm. Feeling a bit better, Tim turned back towards his truck but stopped again. "Forget them. Let them walk home in the snow," he shouted into the strong wind and freezing rain. With that thought, he moved from truck to truck, stabbing every tire, even the last 2 on Larry's car. He scratched marks on the paint of the side, trunk, and hood. Now he was focused on causing damage. Ideas of how to get back at them without resorting to violence filled his mind, even though he started to think maybe that was the better option. They had threatened him and his kids if he found out anything, and now he did find out, so it was either him or them. The light from a nearby post dimmed as the wind and freezing rain made it hard to see. An idea came to him. Blow up the transformer and leave them in the storm without light or heat. He lifted his shotgun, but then remembered JW had a backup generator in the shed. He rushed into the shed, grabbed an axe, and smashed the generator until it was broken. Gasoline spilled everywhere, and he felt a wild joy as his anger surged again after being contained for so long. Looking for more things to break, he saw a lot of junk. He used the axe to destroy the electric box for the pump, even though it didn't serve any real purpose. Still holding the axe, he went back outside and followed the telephone line to the house. He cut it so that they couldn't call for help when they saw their trucks had no tires. After he broke the transformer, they would be in big trouble. Now he had a plan for revenge. The big question was, could he go through with it, knowing that the whole group, including the mother of his kids, could be hurt? He stood in the snow, looking at the bright house that held the woman he loved for 6 years and the 7 men inside with her. Sadness washed over him but quickly turned into anger again. Despite Larry's orders, no one came outside, so Tim went back for one last look. He saw Karen on the bed with Joe. In that moment, his heart raced as he watched his wife with 5 different men. For a moment, he was stunned that the man she had insulted earlier was now with her, and he felt his love for her fade away. With a heavy heart, Tim whispered, "Forget them all. They deserve this." He thought his sons would be better off without their bad influence. He took some pictures with the remaining film. Leaning into the strong wind, he walked back toward the light pole while lightning flashed and thunder rolled. Tim stepped back a few paces and aimed his shotgun at the spot where the transformer line met the house. He waited for a flash of lightning and pulled the trigger at the same moment so the blast would blend with the thunder. Immediately, chaos erupted. The line exploded, sending sparks flying as it danced around, hitting the ground. He saw the lights in the house go out while he quickly stepped back from the live wire. Happy with what he had done, he ran toward his truck. Once he reached the brush line, Tim stopped and looked back at the house. He saw beams of light as a man stepped out the back door and yelled to the others, "The storm is already here! The electric line is broken and is shocking our trucks! Get dressed, we need to leave!" Tim's laughter mixed with the storm as he turned back to his truck. The rain and sleet had turned into a heavy snowstorm, making it hard to see. He walked about 100 yards when he heard a loud whoosh and the sky lit up. Looking back, he saw fire somewhere behind the house, probably in the shed or one of their trucks. Chuckling to himself, he continued on. The brush on each side helped keep him on the road, and soon he spotted his truck through the snow. It was covered in ice, and even with the strong wind, the snow stuck to it. Tim started the truck and turned the heater to high. Reaching under the back seat, he pulled out a can of dicer and an ice scraper, spraying the windshield and clearing off the windows and mirrors. Tim got back into the truck, switched it to 4-wheel drive, and turned towards town. He felt sure that no one could see his lights in the blizzard that made it hard to see even a few feet ahead. He turned on his low beams and fog lights and started the drive home. He couldn't see the ranch house and hoped the old couple living there couldn't see him either. Suddenly, the dark sky lit up for a moment. It was one of their trucks passing by. He laughed a bit, then focused on the road. It was a slow ride, but he got off the dirt road and onto the pavement heading into town. There was no traffic, but he had to move slowly because he could barely see in front of him. The lights seemed to shine brightly, then vanish in the thick snow. As he drove carefully, he thought about the group of men his wife was with. If she was with someone famous or good-looking, he might have understood. But this group was not good-looking at all. The guy who started it all was short and heavy. He was much bigger than Tim, who wore size 42 pants. He might have been nice-looking years ago, but now he looked older than his age. Another guy named Steve was about 5 feet 8 inches and looked like he was overweight. Frank was tall but very thin and had a big nose. Then there was Vinton, who was short and heavy. He was a lawyer but came from money. His third wife was much younger, and if they divorced, he might not be able to afford another wife. They had an agreement that made things harder for her if she cheated, but she asked for the same agreement, thinking it would keep him in check while he played around. Tim realized that if his wife's secrets got out, he would be in trouble too. Another guy, John, was charming but not very fit. The school superintendent was out of shape. He bragged about retiring soon. Larry was the only one who looked good and was in shape, but he was still older than Tim. Tim questioned why his beautiful wife, who could have anyone, would choose this group. Then it dawned on him. He had answers to some of his questions. This started a couple of days after Christmas. She was a curious young woman, but also inexperienced. She got involved with these men who took advantage of her. Tim felt there was no going back for her. Her ability to keep all this hidden from him for 2 months made him feel like he could never trust her again. He wondered if she still loved him or if she ever did. Among those men, 2 were coaches, 2 worked at the school, 2 were on the school board, and 1 was married to a woman Tim used to like a lot. After tonight, she was his favorite again. Their betrayal hurt him deeply. He thought about their actions and how they had disrespected him and his family. They needed to pay for what they did. If they made it through the night, the streetlights were still on as he turned onto his street. He knew that wouldn't last as the winds were strong enough to knock out the power. Tim got home, hung up his warm clothes, and hid a recorder in the attic behind some empty boxes. He had promised to be back for his sons and the babysitter before the storm got too bad. The storm was here, but he could still wake the boys and take their babysitter Sharon to her parents' house. When he opened the door, Sharon met him in the kitchen with a worried look. She hugged him and asked if he was all right, telling him to take a hot bath and warm clothes so he wouldn't catch a cold. Tim found himself thinking about how some women seem to always know what to say and do, or if they learned it from others. He asked Sharon if her parents would worry if she stayed here. She said she called them when the storm started and told them she would stay the night. Tim smiled and told her, "You are a smart young lady, Sharon. Thank you for everything you've done for me and the boys tonight. Now you should change out of those wet clothes and help us get ready before the lights go out." Sharon replied, "Of course, I'll get things set up." Tim found Sharon sitting by a warm fire. He could feel the heat from where he was standing. She had also gathered his lanterns and flashlights and placed them on the coffee table. He took a hot shower and put on comfortable sweatpants. He pulled the mattress off the guest room bed and moved it into the living room near the fire. Next, he made a big pile of sleeping bags, comforters, and blankets on the floor beside the mattress for his sons. When the power went out, the house would get cold, and they would all have to sit close to the fire. "Sharon, come with me," he said. "We need to get you some warmer clothes. Karen has some warm sweats in her closet. Take a hot shower and put on a set of fleece sweats and warm socks. It's better to wear layers. I'll move the sleeping boys to their pile and cover them up with blankets. Bring the blankets from the king bed in my room too," he added, "so we have enough for the mattress." Just as Sharon walked into the living room with the last blanket, the lights went out. Tim added logs to the fire, lit a lantern, and he and Sharon sat cross-legged on the mattress, facing the fireplace. The light from the lantern flickered behind them. Sharon cuddled up to him and wrapped a blanket around them. "I like this," she said. "The flickering lights are nice, and being close to you makes me feel warm inside." Tim knew he should not be this close to her, but he felt angry and hurt. She needed comfort, so he handed her a big glass of water from the coffee table and told her to drink it all. "I filled both of the 5-gallon water jugs, so we'll have enough for a while," Tim explained. "The city gets water from the lake, and the water might stop if the storm gets bad. We can't get dehydrated in this cold. We have lots of water, and we can fill the toilet tank a little to flush if we need to." Sharon drank her water but didn't say anything. Tim felt her looking at him and turned to meet her gaze. "Coach, did you find them?" she asked. He kept looking at her and answered, "I searched everywhere. I even drove to the nightclub. Karen is gone. I have no idea where she is, but I know she's lying." Tim continued, "Karen has been sneaking away for 2 months and not telling the truth. I can only think of one reason why." He paused, knowing that what he wanted to say was much darker. "I saw my wife with 7 other men and took pictures of them together." He sighed and changed the subject. "We both need some sleep. If you wake up and the fire is low, wake me up and I'll get more logs. I don't want you to do it because it's really windy. The door could swing and let in more cold." Suddenly, Sharon jumped up, grabbed a flashlight, ran into the bedrooms, and came back with pillows for them. They said their goodnights, crawled under the covers, and tried to sleep. Tim knew he should sleep too, but doubts filled his mind. He was surprised to wake up 3 hours later and find Sharon snuggled against him and the fire low. He carefully moved away from her and put on a long coat and rain boots. He stepped outside to gather wood. The storm seemed worse. While the thunder and lightning were gone, the wind was strong and the snow blew sideways. The air was freezing, and he had to shut the sliding glass door quickly to keep the snow out. He collected the wagon full of wood he had prepared earlier and parked it beside the fire. After he rebuilt the fire, he checked on his sons and found them warm and cozy. They were so excited, they could hardly speak. Tim told them it was like camping, but at home. They cheered and laughed, but baby Mark looked around and asked, "Where is Mommy?" Tim replied, "She went to stay with friends last night because the storm was too dangerous to drive in. Maybe she can get home today, but I'm sure she will be here by tomorrow. Sharon is staying with us because she can't go home either. You boys can bring all your toys here to play all day." Both boys frowned. It was their first snowfall at home, and they wanted to do all the fun things they had seen on TV. Tim postponed their plans for an hour, but they kept asking, so he bundled them up. Sharon put on one of Karen's ski outfits and boots, and Tim quickly put on a heavy hunting suit. He grabbed the camera and took them outside. The fun didn't last long as the 25-degree weather made them uncomfortable. They hurried back inside, shaking off their wet gloves and clothes, and warmed up by the fire while Tim and Sharon changed. After their cold adventure, the boys happily played with their toys on the carpet beside the fire. By 10 o'clock, the wind had calmed down a bit, and a little sunshine peeked through the clouds. Tim knew the sun would start to melt the snow soon. If Karen and her friends were still safe, they would bring her home as quickly as they could once their cars were fixed or they got rides. He turned the small radio back on and listened to reports from different places. Some caught his ear. The snow was lighter south of Austin, but it was worse to the north and west. San Marcos and towns down south were going about their usual business. But in Williamson, Bell, and Lampasas counties, many people still had no power, and most roads were closed. The hill country was hit the hardest. There was over 6 inches of snow on top of a slippery layer of ice from freezing rain. They shared that the high school where Tim worked had damage to the roof. The police were looking for the superintendent to get more information, but they couldn't find him. They asked anyone who knew where he was to call the sheriff's office. Tim smirked and hoped that the roof had fallen on the superintendent and his group. He didn't wish that on Karen, though, because it would upset his son. Her actions had turned his heart cold. Tim decided his next important step was to talk to his lawyer, who lived less than half a mile away. He thought about confronting Karen and the man who had brought her home, but his mind told him to see his lawyer first to avoid making mistakes. His mind won out just barely. "Sharon, I'm going to get dressed. I'll go see if the roads are clear and check on the electricity," Tim told her. "If it's going to be off for many days, we may need to go somewhere with power. I'll go by myself because I'm not sure how safe the roads are. I'll be back in 2 hours or less." He smiled at Sharon, who looked worried. "Keep the boys busy so they'll be ready for a nap when I return." Tim started the truck and went back inside to collect his guns, tape recorder, some videotapes, and his camera from the attic. After putting them in the truck, he hugged everyone goodbye and drove carefully out of the cul-de-sac. The roads were better than he expected, and with his 4-wheel drive and all-weather tires, he made it to his lawyer's house without much trouble. Andy Robbins was only a few years older than Tim. He had gone through a tough divorce the year before after finding out his wife was having an affair with her boss. He discovered them one day when he came home for some paperwork and walked in on them in his bedroom. This led to a big fight, and Andy ended up in jail for assaulting the boss. When he got out, his wife had taken their money and disappeared with their daughter. In the end, Andy got custody of his child and was awarded some of his money back. But his wife and daughter were still missing. He managed to get his wife's boss fired, but then that man vanished too. People thought he might be hiding with Andy's wife, using Andy's money. Now Andy worked long hours and spent his free time angry and plotting against them. So when Tim showed up at his door on a snowy Saturday, Andy was surprised. He listened carefully as Tim shared his troubles. After Tim calmed down, they talked about what he could do. Andy looked through his law books for similar cases, and they came up with a plan to help Tim get rid of his unfaithful wife, gain custody of his sons, and not lose all his money in the divorce. Tim also had other goals regarding the coaches, the principal, the superintendent, and Larry Barnes, but those were not as urgent for now. Andy promised to have Tim's documents ready by Monday if his laptop worked well, since Tim was likely spotted driving earlier. He advised Tim to report his wife as missing to the police. When Tim arrived at the police station, he found many officers gathered there. They were surprised to see him, and their expressions changed when he explained why he was there. Some looked puzzled. Others seemed to understand what might be happening with his wife during the storm. The police chief told Tim they had many reports of missing persons. This was mostly because with phone services out, anyone who wasn't home during the worst of the storm couldn't call for help. They shared that some rescue teams had found a number of people who had found shelter as the snowstorm hit. The sergeant reminded Tim that his wife was young and healthy, so he should believe she would be fine. They promised to add her name to the list and that they would keep an eye out for her. The chief asked for a recent picture of Karen. Tim searched his wallet, chuckled, and said, "I hope this isn't used for a missing person alert." He handed over the only photo he had, showing Karen in front of Barton Springs Pool in a white swimsuit. The officers passed it around, examining it closely. As he put his wallet away, a young police officer quietly said he understood why Tim was searching for his wife. Tim and the others nearby laughed, and the sergeant asked if there was anything else that could help. Tim recalled that he got home early because the basketball games were canceled. He found his kids with the babysitter who didn't know where his wife had gone. Tim told them he had been looking for her. But when a winter storm hit, he decided to come back home to care for his boys and the babysitter. Tim planned to take the babysitter home, but her parents wanted her to stay inside because of the bad weather. He told them that he made a warm fire, set up some beds, and they all spent the night in front of the fireplace. The babysitter was with his kids for now, but he needed to get back to take her home. The roads were better now, and he had a sturdy truck. The officers assured him they would keep an eye out for his wife, Karen, and wished him good luck managing 2 active boys stuck inside before he returned home. Tim drove down the country road to his ranch and saw that the snow was untouched. He smiled and headed home. Sharon welcomed him with a smile, pointing at the sleeping boys to keep quiet. He told her that his lawyer said he needed to take her home quickly to avoid problems with his divorce. They talked about what to do if Karen showed up at her parents' house, with or without someone else. He shared his plans for the weekend and Monday, and she promised never to tell anyone about their talk, even under pressure. When Tim entered the warm living room, the boys were awake, having a snack with Sharon. They packed the truck and headed to her house. The drive over the snowy roads was calm, and her parents were very happy to see her. They assured Tim that they had a fireplace, enough wood, food, and water so they would be fine. Her family went back to their house, hugging themselves against the chilly wind. Sharon opened the back door, kissed the boys goodbye, and said, "I want to help you, Coach. Just let me know what I can do." Tim turned to her and said he had a task for her. Sharon smiled and went inside. Tim stopped by the police station to let them know he was taking his sons to stay with family until the power came back. The officer on duty, Jimmy, was a former neighbor who had moved away for his wife's job. Jimmy asked how to reach him if they found Karen. Tim told him to use Andy's number. Tim explained, "I don't know where we will stay yet, but Andy will know how to contact me. He's my neighbor, and yes, my lawyer too, but for now he's just my neighbor." Jimmy noticed Tim's bare finger and held up his own ring. "I understand, brother. When I saw her name, I wondered why she wasn't home. Do you know where she is?" Tim replied, "Not really. I got home because the game was canceled. The babysitter said Karen was picked up by a man in a pickup truck, but she didn't say where they were going. Please let Andy know if you find her. I just don't want the boys here if things go badly, he added. Jimmy patted him on the shoulder and wished him a safe trip, reminding him to be careful on the roads. The main highway to Austin was mostly covered in snow. The traffic lights were out, and there were many cars stuck in ditches, but Tim's truck handled the snow well. He needed gas, so he stopped at a station just south of Austin. He bought a newspaper and flipped to the sports section. He saw the headline that the Mustangs won the district title and the top-ranked team won their game on Friday. This meant their postponed game wouldn't be played, which was both a letdown and relief for Tim. He was sad his team lost, but glad that his coaching for the year was done. Now he could focus on the hard work ahead. When they reached San Marcos, there was only a bit of snow, and none as they exited at New Braunfels. Tim drove straight to his friend's house, left the sleeping boys in the truck, and knocked on the door. Will, known as Wild Willie to his friends, gave Tim a big hug and pulled him inside. Tim explained the boys were in the truck, so Will helped him carry them inside. Will's wife, Laura, told them to lay the boys on a bed in the guest room. Then they went to the kitchen table to talk. After discussing the storm, Will asked why Karen wasn't alone. Tim explained he had come home early because of the canceled game and found the babysitter. The babysitter told him Karen was picked up by a man who was going to the game, as she had done all season. But the issue was that Karen and the coaches hadn't gone to any out-of-town games that year and weren't going to this one either. Laura looked at him with worry, and then walked around the table to hug him. Tim shared that he needed a place to stay until tomorrow or Monday. He explained why, and they told him he could stay with them. Laura would help look after the kids. It would be good practice for them since their first child was coming in 7 months. Tim said congratulations and gave them both big hugs and kisses on the cheek. They talked for a while about becoming parents, and then Tim went to check on his son who had returned to the table. Tim asked Will, "Does your friend still have the camera shop downtown? Is he open today? I need to print some pictures." Will nodded. "Yes, he does, and he's open all day. Do you want me to take you there?" Laura quickly offered to take care of Tim's sons while he and Will went downtown. Even if the shop was closed, his friend would still be there. "He lives above the shop now," Tim said as they drove. "He got a divorce about 6 months ago. Even though he was not innocent, she got the kids and the house. He only sees them every other weekend and for a month in the summer. It's tough. Texas divorce laws are hard to deal with." Tim spoke carefully, saying, "Will, there's more to the story than I told you, but you have to promise you won't tell anyone, even a jury." Will took his right hand off the wheel, raised it, and made the sign of the cross with his left hand, promising he wouldn't say anything as they continued driving. "I found them," Will said flatly. "I took 2 hard drives full of videos. I think there are some videos of Karen and possibly other women, but I haven't watched any of them. I want to make copies and hide them in different places in case the police ask for them back. I hope to use them to get out of my marriage and keep some of my money and custody of my sons. I don't like dragging you and Carl into this, but I need your help." "I'm always with you," Wildman said with a big smile. "Don't worry, we've got your back." Carl waved at them when they walked in, finished ringing up a sale, and then came over to greet them. Tim explained what he needed to do quickly, and Carl agreed to help while they waited. He told his helper to manage the front of the shop, took Tim and Will to the back, and started setting up his computer. After he brought in a pillowcase full of hard drives, Tim asked how long it would take and how much it would cost to make copies of everything. Carl counted the drives, gave him a fair price, and said he could work on it that afternoon and evening. "Let's get started. How many copies do you need?" Carl asked. Tim said he wanted 2 copies of each. Carl began to work. They were still sitting and chatting when Laura called to remind them about their plans to go out with 3 other couples that night. The boys would be staying with 3 kids and 2 babysitters at Harry's house, so they couldn't make excuses. The beer garden outside had lots of strong German beer and friendly people, which made everyone relax. They were the only ones outside on that cool night, and they pulled tables together for everyone. Packed inside, there was a jukebox playing lots of songs about cheating and heartbreak, mostly old country, along with Elvis, Ricky Nelson, Johnny Mathis, and other singers. When Betty, Harry's wife asked where Karen was. Tim, on his fourth beer, shared how he came home early and found a babysitter instead of his wife. He suspected she was out with other men, but claimed he didn't know for sure since he left with the boys before she came home. They knew the Austin area had a lot of snow, but didn't know how bad it was. Tim didn't explain it well. He already knew about Karen's actions, but the other men were shocked. "I can't believe she would do that," John exclaimed, and Harry said, "I never thought Karen was capable of that. Are you sure?" Tim shrugged. "No, but there aren't many other options, right?" He noticed the four women exchanged looks when Harry said this and called them out. "What? Are you ladies not surprised?" They looked at each other, and Betty finally said, "No, I guess we aren't. Men often miss what women are up to. We can tell each other's feelings pretty well. Last time we were all together, she was always flirting and teasing when you weren't around." "So what?" her husband asked. "You all flirt and tease too. Are you all seeing other men?" Betty said, "I flirt, but I have my reasons. And I want to remind you how lucky you are to have me." She joked, "But have you ever had to look for me at a dance because I disappeared for 20 minutes after going to the restroom? Remember when she claimed she got sick and had to hug the toilet but then went right back to drinking? What did Will's brother Louis and his friend Vic say after that?" Betty teased, which made Harry stumble over his words. "Okay, but you know how they like to tell stories. We didn't believe a word because Will, John, and I were outside too, and nothing happened while we were there." Laura interrupted, looking at her husband. "Harry, John, Corky, did Karen ever rub against you on the dance floor or under the table?" He turned red and stammered. "She was just drunk. It didn't mean anything." "Are you sure?" Laura asked. "I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that." She felt a rush of excitement when she first got together with JW, and even more when she was with both JW and Steve. She thought having two men was even better. So, when Frank showed up and insisted on joining in or she would lose her job, she wanted to see if more really was better. Being with Frank was just okay, but having three men was thrilling. Afterward, he told her she would enjoy another surprise when she returned. That surprise turned out to be Barry Benson, a wealthy lawyer and a well-known figure in politics. He was married to a lovely woman, but he said he wanted more fun in his life. Barry wasn't amazing, but he tried to make her happy. He also introduced her to a new thrill. Her first new man was a state senator, a big player in politics. They met at a hotel in Austin one Wednesday afternoon instead of the education conference Frank had sent her to. She felt a rush just being with such an important man. She felt like she was on top of the world, even if he wasn't great at satisfying her. The excitement of it all made her want more, and she got just that. The next day, two more powerful men came to see her, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Neither was extraordinary, but she made them feel like they were. She loved the feeling of being with important men. Sometimes that feeling was enough to make her feel pleasure, even if the experience itself wasn't great. On the last day of the event, she did something bold with a very important man and then spent time with his big supporter. She felt proud to think she was meeting top leaders in her state. But one of the men that afternoon was strange, and she told Ben not to do that again. Her next event was a party at J Ranch. There were no politicians there, but they included Barry and a sheriff, so it became a big group. Tonight, there would be 7 men. Her idea that more was better would be tested tonight. After all, she had been with 5 men without any real joy. She knew the last 2 wouldn't be any better. Now she just felt bored and used, ready for it all to end. Being in this wild life wasn't as fun as she thought. The only reasons she stayed were threats to tell Tim about what she had been doing, the promise of freedom after filming, and a big payment of $5,000. If she got that money, she could take her family on vacation. That would be nice, even if it came from her secret life. She knew the film wouldn't be shown in the US, which gave her some comfort. But still, she worried. She realized she was always wanting more. Deep down, she knew it could lead to trouble. Then Larry made a comment that her husband couldn't satisfy her, and it made her furious. She was already feeling guilty and wanted to return to her normal life. Larry took the heat of her anger. After sending him away, she went to get her clothes and told J.W. to drive her home. Tim would never know about the extra man tonight. He never had, and she wanted to keep it that way. Everyone tried to change her mind. They used both friendly talks and threats, But the thing that swayed her was the promise that after one more tough scene, she would only have one quick shot left to finish filming. After having a drink and calming down a bit, she finally agreed. She thought it was best to get the work done quickly so she could return to her husband and children. The scene with 5 men was difficult to film. While they were in the middle of it, loud bangs startled them and the lights went out. Someone yelled about a blizzard and live wires sparking outside. Everyone rushed to the living room using a flashlight to find their clothes. Karen had only worn a dress and high heels for her first part, where she arrived at a party and was charmingly taken in by JW. Knowing it would get cold inside, she wrapped herself in a quilt from the couch. As they planned how to handle the electric wires, they heard a loud crash and saw that the shed was on fire. It caused panic since their trucks were nearby. The situation got worse when one of the trucks caught fire, then exploded, lighting up Frank's truck as well. Within moments, the fire started to reach the last truck and spread towards the house. Fear took over, and they quickly gathered blankets and anything useful. JW started to head to the bedroom for the cameras, but changed his mind when he saw that part of the house was already burning. He ran back into the living room, feeling scared, and quickly took them to the boathouse by the lake. They were trying to run and slide down the steep hill because the snow was falling heavily. When they got to the boathouse, they rushed inside and looked around. Most of the stuff in there was useless, like tubes, paddles, and boat tools, but they found a propane heater. They stacked up boxes, rafts, and anything else they could find against the walls to keep warm. Then JW lit the propane heater. It didn't help much in such bad weather, but by staying close together and sharing blankets and jackets, they kept some of the cold away. Karen, in her tiny dress, still felt miserable. She shivered and held on to the others, hoping she would see the sun come up after the rush of fear wore off. They all started to think about their situation, and Karen realized she wouldn't get home in time to ease the babysitter's worries or see her husband. Oh no, how could she explain to Tim why she wasn't home, or why she'd be gone all night? He's going to be so mad and want a divorce? The others, except for JW and Steve, told her they were worried about the same things too, so they spent their time trying to come up with a believable story. Most of their ideas were too silly to work, so no one got any sleep. They had plenty of time to think and change their stories. Finally, just before dawn, they created one story that Benton thought would work well, even in court. He had agreed to help each of them with their stories, and because of his own agreement, he had to be okay with it. They practiced the story by asking each other questions until they all knew it well. Karen knew the story still had many holes. It was like a screen door instead of a strong wall, but it was the best they could come up with. Maybe their spouses would be so glad to see them that they wouldn't question their unlikely story. But Karen was sure that telling the truth would end everything good in her life, so it was worth a try. She could always tell the truth later and ask for a second chance. The long night also gave JW a chance to go on and on about all he lost in the fire. He talked about new things, valuable things, and family keepsakes, showing how heartbroken he was. He seemed to think they were more important than the jobs and relationships everyone else was trying to save. Steve listened quietly for a while, then spoke up firmly. While you're worrying and complaining, remember you also lost all your videos and recordings. What do you think Marnie and the other investors will say when you tell them you have nothing? Steve's straightforward words caught everyone's attention. JW hung his head, feeling sad and defeated. The other men began planning how to redo the movie scenes. Karen stayed quiet for a few minutes before facing them with the truth. You need a new leading lady. I'm done. Without those videos and recordings, you have nothing to hold over me anymore. I was foolish to let JW charm me, but I've learned my lesson. When a snowstorm hits hard, it's a sign to rethink things. I have thought about it, and I'm not going back to a path that includes being with you guys. Not at all. You might threaten to tell my husband what I've done or try to go after my job, but if you mess with me, what I'll do will be worse than what happened tonight. I don't know how I got into this mess, but you can't compare to my husband. So stay away from me. They were all tired, half-dressed, and so cold they could barely feel their feet. None of the men argued with her. They thought she was amazing and enjoyed her company, but she had made it clear she was finished with that part of their lives. They knew it was best for everyone to let it go. Plus, they had other women in mind for the role, including a few attractive college girls and even the pretty wife of the local deputy sheriff. After the storm, they still had to deal with the trouble that would come from explaining why they were out all night during a winter storm, leaving their families alone in the blizzard. And they also had to think about the ruined trucks and the house fire. Morning brought more misery for the men hiding in the boathouse at Rogers Ranch. Daylight didn't mean they were found and safe, or that they could go home soon. But it did mean they were closer to safety and to facing their unbelievable stories to their worried families. It was late Saturday afternoon when an Army helicopter from Fort Hood, looking for people stuck in vehicles, spotted the burned house and shed, and then saw them waving by the lake. A rescue team and an ambulance were sent to check on the fire survivors. They found everyone was suffering from cold and lack of water, but Karen was in the worst shape because of her white dress and lack of proper clothes. All were taken to the nearest hospital for help. The others received care for frostbite and dehydration, but Karen stayed overnight for more observation and treatment. The doctor who looked at her thought something was off with her condition. He called the nurse outside and asked her to check if the patient had been hurt, and to take samples, no matter what Karen said, before helping her. Karen said she hadn't been hurt, but agreed to be cleaned up. The nurse quietly took the samples and then cleaned Karen, knowing that either she had been hurt or had been with more than one man. With phone lines and power still not working well, all Karen could do was lie in the hospital bed, pray for her family's safety, and cry when she was released early Sunday morning. A police officer came to give her a ride home. She wore borrowed scrubs and a light jacket from the hospital's Lost and Found, which was not enough to keep her warm in the cold 25-degree weather. The officer turned the heater on high to keep her warm during the ride, knowing she wasn't feeling well. He noticed how beautiful she looked, even in big scrubs that didn't fit well. When they arrived, the officer helped her check the house to make sure she was safe. He started a big fire in the fireplace for warmth. His radio called him away for another job, but before he left, he asked if she would be okay, and told her again that he didn't know where her husband was or how to reach him. He mentioned that the phone service should be back on by tomorrow or possibly tonight, and the power would also be restored soon. After he left, she found a note on the kitchen table. Reading it made her cry. It said, "Karen, if you're reading this, the boys and I are fine. I have taken them to stay with family that has power. I have many questions, but let's start here. Where were you? Who were you with? How long has this been going on? Why? If you're back, meet me at Andy Robbins' office after school on Monday. Be ready to tell me the truth. This is your only chance, so bring your lawyer, Tim." The note made her panic. How did he find out? She knew Sharon, who admired him, would have told him about Friday night and the other babysitting nights. Her husband was very smart and could have guessed what was happening. She felt she had to come up with a plan to make him believe her stretched truths. She could not lose him or her family just because she wanted to explore new things. Deep down, she realized she loved her husband. He was the only man who fulfilled her in every way. Maybe it was a wrong choice to wander, but she learned something valuable. From now on, she promised to be the best wife and mother. With this thought keeping her calm, she sat by the fire, wrapped herself in their favorite quilt for watching TV, and practiced the story she would tell to ease his worries and bring her family back home. At work, Jimmy read the report about the rescue of Karen and 7 men. He knew the details would make Tim worry more, but he promised to keep him updated. Andy Robbins looked shocked and disappointed when he heard what happened, but didn't ask more questions. Jimmy told him about Karen's health problems that kept her in the hospital, and that she was now home recovering. He suggested someone should check on Karen, or if police should add her to their list of people to watch over. Andy said he would check on her since the house was only a few blocks away. After Jimmy left, Andy put on snow gear and carefully walked to Karen's home. When Karen opened the door, her happy expression faded when she saw it was Andy. She invited him in, moved chairs near the fire, and asked him to sit and talk. Karen was glad she had changed into nice but modest jeans and a sweater because she hoped Tim would come home when he found out she was back. Andy was a good friend of Tim's, but she noticed his worried looks when he thought no one was watching. She intended to use his feelings for her to get information. She sat close to the fire, giving him a good view, while making sure to look sweet and innocent. She asked Andy where Tim and the boys were and how she could reach him. He replied honestly that he didn't know, but Tim had promised to call when the phone service was working again. Karen felt let down, but she smiled gently and said how happy she would be to see her family again. Andy's concerned look made her wrinkle her brow, and she said, "I know you have questions, just like Tim. I won't tell the whole story until I'm with my husband, but I promise it's not what it looks like." "Karen," Andy said softly, "the police officer told me that you were stuck for the night and that the house and cars were on fire. That explains why you didn't come home. But why did you leave your kids with a babysitter and go away with 2 coaches? Tim doesn't trust them, especially since there was no real trip planned." Karen's heart was beating fast, but she tried to stay calm. She said, "Andy, we were really going to watch the game. It was important for the team's chances to make the playoffs. When we stopped at a convenience store, everyone was talking about the bad weather and the canceled games. That's when we decided to turn around and go back. Ranch was on the way home, so we stopped there. He wanted to see if he needed to pick up more supplies for his pipes. Some of his friends were there playing poker and having drinks. We talked and had a few drinks with them. Just as we were about to leave, the storm hit. You know what happened next. But you don't know that I was so scared I might die. I prayed over and over to survive, just so I could hold my husband and kids again and tell them I love them. There's more to it, but I want to tell Tim directly. Do you know how I can reach him? I need my family back." Andy felt sorry for Karen. Still, he knew 2 things that stopped him from getting close to her. Tim was his client and friend, and he could see she was not being honest. She looked sweet, but he could tell she was lying. She was good at acting and lying, and she told the story well. She planned to keep lying instead of telling the truth and asking for forgiveness. Tim had seen what happened, and he wouldn't accept more lies. Andy warned her, "Karen, your story seems possible, but if you want to fix things with Tim, you must tell him the truth. I don't know what he knows or thinks, but your story doesn't match his view of events, and Tim is not a fool." Karen's worry grew with Andy's words, but she kept acting calm. She believed everyone would understand her side of the story. "Andy, I know things went wrong, but you know Tim has a quick temper. When he hears the truth, everything will be okay." Andy looked at her with sympathy, stood up, and said he would check on her later. She kissed him on the cheek and whispered thanks for being a friend. As he drove home, he could still smell her scent and feel her kiss on his cheek, which warmed him. After Andy left, Karen changed her clothes and walked around her cold house, wearing a heavy coat over her sweats. She noticed some of her boys' toys and winter clothes were missing. Tim had taken his toiletries and some clothes, but he planned to come back because nothing else was gone. She returned to the warm living room, added logs to the fire, and lay down on the couch. She felt completely drained from the events of Friday night. She hadn't slept more than a few minutes, worried all day, and then feeling excited to be rescued. She piled quilts over herself and enjoyed the comfort of her home, even without electricity. She relaxed and soon fell asleep. But her first dream turned into a nightmare, waking her up feeling scared. It started nice. She was sitting at a table with Tim and 5 other men. The men bought her drinks and danced with her. They touched her in ways that made her feel good. But she worried about how Tim felt about it. She asked Tim why he let them do that, and he said it was her choice. She got angry because he wouldn't stop them from touching her, so she started to act more boldly, dancing closely with the men. Then one of them took her back to the table and set her on it, hugging her and kissing her. Tim watched, not reacting because it seemed she was okay with it. The crowd cheered as they got closer. Then a big man took a turn with her. She screamed and fought him, terrified he would hurt her. Everyone was shouting, and he laughed, telling her she wouldn't feel anything when Tim came back. She woke up screaming, sweaty, terrified, and alone, crying until the memories stopped flashing in her mind. She knew it was just a bad dream, but she also knew Tim would look at her with disgust if he found out what she had done. Just like in her dream, he would leave her. Once she calmed down, she drifted back to sleep and avoided nightmares this time. When she woke up later, sunlight was shining through the window, and someone was knocking on the door. She hurried to answer it, finding Andy with a big thermos and a sandwich wrapped in foil. "I have a propane stove, so I brought you a ham, egg, and cheese sandwich and a lot of coffee. How was your nap?" Karen realized she probably looked a bit messy. She hadn't even combed her hair before opening the door, and she had fallen asleep in her clothes. "Thank you, Andy. Can I freshen up and then join you for coffee and food?" He looked at her with a crooked smile and tilted his head, asking why. "You look fine to me." She laughed at his comment and hurried to the bathroom. The mirror showed her a different story, so she quickly got ready. She fixed her hair, put on light makeup, and changed into a nice sweatsuit. When she went back to the living room, Andy was adding logs to the fire. When he turned around, his face showed he liked her new look. He went back to the coffee table and offered her a cup of coffee with cream and sugar, just how she liked it. "Thanks," she said before devouring the sandwich. "I'm embarrassed I ate so fast, but I was really hungry. I don't remember the last time I ate. Thank you for taking care of me." Andy tried not to stare at her and focused on staying friendly. He looked away, poured some more coffee for them, and reminded her that he had promised the police he would check on her now and then. Given everything she had been through and the power outage, she looked at him and said softly, "No matter your reason, I appreciate it. You've been a good friend since we moved here. I don't understand why we don't meet up more often." "As a divorced man without kids, I don't fit in the same way since Dina and the kids left," he said. "You all didn't neglect me, though. I pulled away from everyone. I've been spending my free time looking for my family and thinking about what I could have done differently. I'm not great company anymore, and I didn't want to bring you down with my problems. It was my choice to step back." Karen realized that her own choices might push her away unless she could convince Tim and Andy that her absence last Friday was just a series of bad events and nothing more. She worried that their smart minds would see through the story she had created under pressure with others in the boathouse. She could use a friend when hard times came, and Andy had always seemed to be interested in her. Maybe she could win him over to her side. "Andy," she said softly, "it's getting warm in here with the fire and the sunlight. This fleece is hot. Would you mind if I changed into something more comfortable?" "Not at all," he replied. She quickly went down the hall to her closet. Andy was staring out at the melting snow when she came back. The look on his face said he liked what he saw. She moved the old love seat closer to the fire, sat down, and invited Andy to join her. He did. She angled her legs slightly toward him, her knee almost touching his. She started talking excitedly about the winter storm that was much stronger than expected and how it surprised so many people. Andy seemed a bit uneasy with how close she was, so she changed the topic and asked about the basketball team's upcoming game. Andy explained they wouldn't be playing because the first-place team had their game, so the playoffs didn't matter anymore. It would be too hard to find referees for a game that wasn't planned. "Oh no, I really wanted to see them play again. They've improved so much this year. They try so hard and he coaches them well. They all love him, even his students. That's why he's been named Teacher of the Year again," she said excitedly. Karen innocently pressed her knee against Andy's leg and put her hand on his arm while speaking about her husband being a great coach. Andy looked uncomfortable but didn't move away. "Now, Andy, let's talk about you. How are you really doing? I know you say you're okay with the divorce and just want your kids back, but I feel there's a deep sadness in you. Are you really all right?" As she asked, Karen rubbed his thigh and left her hand there. He didn't pull away, looking at her with sadness. "I'm doing as well as I can, Karen," he replied. "Catching my ex was hard. The divorce was tough, and losing my kids nearly broke me. If I could do it again, I would change a lot. Maybe I could have stopped it. Maybe we could have worked things out. I wish I'd given us a chance." Karen moved her hand from his leg to his arm, resting her head on his shoulder. She let the smell of her hair and perfume fill the air around him. "Oh, Andy, I'm so sorry," she whispered, full of sympathy. She took his hand in hers and squeezed it. Karen knew the effect she had on men when she got this close. With a smile, she looked up at him, inviting him to kiss her. Slowly, Andy leaned down and their lips met in a gentle kiss. She could feel his excitement growing as their lips touched, and he was completely under her charm. He wanted to take this amazing woman for himself. He didn't care that she had been with 7 men just a day and a half ago, or that she was married to his client. All he wanted was to see her beautiful body. They took off their clothes and started kissing. He was close to reaching his limit when a big chunk of snow fell from the roof and landed on the patio with a loud sound. They both jumped in surprise. They quickly looked around to see what had happened, then returned to where they were. But that short pause made Andy think. He pushed Karen away, stood up, and said he had to go. Karen looked at him with a sad face. She pouted her lips and spoke in her sweetest voice. "Andy, I know you need this. Let me help you as a friend, and no one will ever know. Come on. It's been too long. You really need it." Andy hesitated, but feeling panic, he hurried to the door. He told her goodbye and left as she lay on the couch. Karen thought he had become too uptight. "We could have had so much fun," she thought. "It's like we switched places. At first he was the brave one and I was the shy one. He had many women before me while I hadn't been with anyone. He was my first. Now I want to explore my own desires." She remembered their early days together, the guilt she felt for not waiting until marriage began to fade with each new experience. Even though she sometimes felt guilty about her past beliefs, she couldn't help but want to be with him whenever she saw him. She started to notice other handsome men around her and wondered if she could feel the same way with them. But deep down, she knew she and Tim were meant to be. They got engaged, married, and then had 2 kids right away while she was pregnant. With all the changes, she felt a wild desire for intimacy. After childbirth, she quickly returned to her fit self. Now, almost 4 years into their marriage, she craved intimacy more than ever. She thought about it all the time when she wasn't working or taking care of their kids. She wanted it 3 or 4 times more often than Tim did. But even then, she still felt unsatisfied. She wanted more adventures and experiences with new men, big, small, short, or tall. She wanted to flirt, tease, and make them desire her until they would give in completely. Her first chance to stray was thrilling. She easily caught the attention of Tim's best friend's brother and another married man at a dance. They admired her and danced with her, telling her how beautiful she was. One of them rubbed her leg under the table while her husband was sitting right there. They convinced her to step outside for a moment. She told them she needed to go to the restroom, but she slipped out the side door instead. They took a couple of hits from a joint and she felt light and free as she joined them in a van nearby. This was her first time cheating, and she felt excited being with 2 men at once. When she returned to the table, she said she didn't feel well from the snacks and drinks. Her lover seemed amused, but Tim and the other men showed concern. The women, however, looked at her with suspicion, but she got away with it. The experience wasn't great, but the thrill of cheating was addictive, and she loved that she had done something daring and gotten away with it. After that, she needed to try again. She sensed that the women were raising eyebrows, but they were drinking more and more. Karen managed her drinking and played with her husband as she waited for her next chance. Everyone was dancing, and many were flirting in the dark corners of the dance floor. Tim's best friend Will and 2 brothers seemed most likely to fall for her tricks, based on how they were acting. While dancing with Will, his wife and some other girls stepped away. He quickly took her outside, and the 2 brothers followed. It's hard to say what would have happened if a couple of smokers hadn't come out and interrupted them. She was ready and wouldn't have stopped them. Later, she used her charm to attract one of the young married coaches from their school, and even got her old boyfriend, now married, into an affair that almost cost them both their marriages. When his brother drove into the field where they were, she hid on the floorboard of his truck. He made up a weak excuse about watching the sunset, but she could tell he was nervous. After that, he panicked and wanted nothing to do with her again. He felt proud of how he won her over, and Steve was pleased with how they made her do things with him and the others. But really, she might have been the one to charm them if given the chance. Even though she always wanted something new, and even though she had been with many men since getting married, her husband was still the best she had ever been with. Tim was strong and good-looking, and he tried hard to please her. But even his amazing efforts only made her happy for a little while. She bought batteries for her toys every month from Sam's Club. In fact, she had used up 2 of them since Christmas, and that was while she was with her husband almost every day. She was also seeing 3 to 7 other guys each week. "You're right, Tim. I can't seem to get enough," she said. And so, my perfect life crumbled in an instant. The love I once knew was replaced by a searing betrayal. But this was only the beginning. The path ahead was dark, filled with secrets and lies. Little did they know, I was just getting started. The storm was coming, waiting for part 2. Hey, listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.